Hello, and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 61st Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1988. Stephen Frears adapted Christopher Hampton's play Les Liaisons Dangereux to the screen with Dangerous Liaisons, a salacious costume drama starring an extraordinary cast of actors, including Glenn Close, John Malkovich, and Michelle Pfeiffer. The film was a late-breaking contender at the Oscars, winning with 3 of its 7 nominations, most notably for Adapted Screenplay. But oddly enough, Stephen Frears was not nominated for his showy work in Best Director, and the film was not able to overcome the most-watched film of the year, Rain Man, in Best Picture. So why couldn't a film with snob appeal like Dangerous Liaisons win? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to Dangerous Liaisons. Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I am your host, Kevin Jacobson, and today I have a long-awaited, long-in-the-making guest to talk about 1988. She is a writer for AwardsDaily, and I have with me Jazz Tangcay.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi, how's it going?
We finally did it.
I know, we've been trying to do this since, Gravity. Which is long ago, but here we are.
Here we are. We made it.
We did, and we're going to talk about a very juicy movie, so I'm excited to jump on into it. So what we're going to be talking about first off is the runner-up for 1988 that I and many others believe, but it has been debated as well on the internet. The runner-up, I think, is probably Dangerous Liaisons, and we'll get into some of that discussion as to what other movies it could be later, but the movie I've chosen to focus on is Dangerous Liaisons. So, just a quick summary before we jump on in. It is based on the 18th century French novel Les Liaisons Dangereuses by Pierre Shoulda de Laclos, while mostly taking inspiration from Christopher Hampton's 1987 play adaptation. And so the film takes place before the French Revolution and centers on the Marquise de Merteuil, a wealthy widow looking to take revenge on her ex-lover, the Comte de Bastide, after he dumps her. And so Bastide is now engaged to be married to Cécile de Volanges, a much younger, innocent, virginal woman. And so Merteuil arranges for one of her former lovers, the Vicomte de Valmont, to seduce Cécile and essentially deflower her. And meanwhile, Valmont has a game of seduction of his own planned for another woman, Madame de Tourvel, who is a religious married woman. And Merteuil and Valmont make an agreement that if Valmont helps her seek revenge on her former flame and also manages to sleep with Madame de Tourvel, then it's a lot of names, then Valmont will also get to sleep with Merteuil. And from there, a very dangerous game of manipulation, seduction, and revenge is set in motion. And so the film was directed by Stephen Frears, with Christopher Hampton adapting his own play for the screen. And Glenn Close stars as the Marquis de Merteuil, John Malkovich as the Vicomte de Valmont, Michelle Pfeiffer as Madame de Tourvel, Uma Thurman as Cécile de Volanges, Keanu Reeves as Raphael Danceny, who is a courtier of Cécile also. And we also got Swoosie Kurtz, Mildred Natwick, Valerie Gogin, and a young Peter Capaldi. So Dangerous Liaisons made $34 million in the US and was nominated for 7 Academy Awards and won 3 of them, but not Best Picture. So, Jazz, tell me about your relationship with Dangerous Liaisons.
Oh my gosh, I'm really going to age myself now, aren't I? So I think I was probably I discovered it in the early 90s, like probably 91-ish, during my Michelle Pfeiffer phase. The first time I discovered her, I was obsessed with Cher, and I watched Witches of Eastwick, and it was like, hey, who's the blonde? Oh, it's Michelle Pfeiffer. Let me work through her entire filmography. So I watched Lady Hawk, Grease 2, Married to the Mob, Tequila Sunrise, and Dangerous Liaisons. So that was the first time I saw it, and I fell in love with it. And I think I was telling you, I've been obsessed with it ever since. Like growing up in England, I had an obsession with the French Revolution and would often go to Paris and go to Versailles, thinking it was like the house, or the palace and Dangerous Liaisons. Obviously, it wasn't, but yeah. And it was so much fun to revisit it again this past weekend. Just it's a timeless film, right? I mean,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
they're just such babies.
I know.
Like Michelle's so young, Uma's like even Glenn. I mean,
Yeah, they're all really like in their prime here. Just there's just so much like sexual energy coming off of them, you know?
but that was really like my first intro to it, and I think I wore out the video copy that I had that I recorded off I think BBC One at the time. And then I realized they'd censored it, so I bought the proper store version and was like, oh, okay, this is a lot more sexual than that. And I was a teenager, so there you go.
Yeah,
I've aged myself.
it's okay. Yeah, The Dangerous Liaisons was one of my favorite films to revisit for this podcast. And I watched it as a teenager myself, and it made a big impression on me at the time. It made a big impression for me, actually, for Glenn Close as well as Michelle Pfeiffer. Really established for me my love for Glenn Close to like a decades long love of Glenn Close. It's funny that we're talking about it 30 years later, how we have Glenn Close possibly winning her Oscar this year. Fingers crossed. Who knows what might happen? But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is really a role for her that a lot of people talk about being like, they really should have given it to her for this or Fatal
Mm-hmm.
Attraction, one or the other. These two iconic roles she has, because she just totally commands the screen in this film.
Well, from that opening shot, I
Yeah,
mean, I forgot how powerful that was of like her being all made up, ready for like the sexual battle that lies ahead.
yeah,
And I think that's what drew me into the Glenn Close phase too, that has continued to this day. Um,
absolutely. Hmm.
it's just so powerful, and just how he shot that whole thing, and of course her journey.
Oh yeah. It's yet another one of her, very complex women that she plays, that she's not afraid to just go there as far as being like a totally virtually villainous character. I think it's fair to characterize her as very villainous in this film. She does not mind just going there with it and just
Mm-hmm.
being totally, it's ironic because she completely foregoes like vanity in that regard. And so yeah, otherwise, I think this is an absolutely mind blowing film, just as far as how it manages to capture this really entangled web of deceit and sex and seduction. And there's like a lot to keep
Mm-hmm.
up. There's a lot to keep up with, I think, through the film. And you might get lost in some of the names and kind of the relationships and how they're evolving too at the same time. There's a lot you have to really pay attention to what's happening. But if you are paying attention and you are engaging with the film, I think it really rewards you in the end. So
Yeah.
for me, a
Well,
very satisfying film. Yeah,
I
go
think
on.
the way like Riz shoots that film is just that he makes you feel like you are in the room with them. Like you feel like you are like conniving like all these little schemes with Valmont and wait, I always get her name wrong when you just said it. My French is terrible. I'm sorry.
I think it's Murtai.
Matai.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So you're in the room with them and every single one of those characters. Um, and I feel that's part of the pull,
mhm,
which is what makes it so fantastic and like as their lies and this web, and you're trying to figure out who's sleeping with who or why they're sleeping with that person. And
Yeah.
you know, just it was so fantastic to just revisit, and I wish more people were still talking about it today.
I know. I do really think it does do a good job of kind of making their schemes and their sort of devilishness seem very natural to them in a way, to the point that it's almost like appealing what they're doing, just kind of playing with people's emotions as like this elaborate human chess game, you know?
Well,
But
Uma's like what the prize, right? It's her
right.
virginity is the prize,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I'm getting it. So yeah, and Malkovich is just as like he's like she's the she devil and he's like the devil, and
Mm-hmm.
they're
Yeah.
just perfect partners in crime, but they're also not hate like you don't hate those characters
Right.
given the nasty things that they're actually doing. You're in that game with them, enjoying it.
Yeah, in a really kind of sick way. And I think that the movie really doesn't cast judgment too much on that either. It doesn't kind of look down upon them. You're kind of just in it with them, which I find to be a really interesting choice. And another interesting choice is the fact that everyone in this film is basically playing with American accents because it's primarily American actors.
Yeah.
So, what do you make of just like the choice to have this set in France, you know, for all intents and purposes, and have these French names as well, but also be just speaking like plain American English?
Do you know what? As a teenager, when I saw that, I never really questioned it. Like, and I feel even now, it's not something that I look on and think, why do they not speak with French accents? Like, I'm sure of, like, I didn't question the authenticity of that. I don't have a problem with it right now to this day. Um, I just, I just feel that the whole story was so well done that the fact that they're Americans in this grand setting and this great scheme wasn't problematic.
Yeah, I very much agree, and it's one of these things that bothers me sometimes in movies where they're just like they have actors just speaking English but just having like an accent that happens to be in the country they're in. It just kind of like you can't have it both ways, you know? It's one of these things where it's like, come on. So I appreciate that they were just like, you know what? This is just all very plain spoken American. We're not even going to have them do British accents. They're just going to, you know. And I think in a way that's almost refreshing to an audience because if you look at this movie, you look at the poster, you look at all the elements involved, you might have this idea of what this movie is, but it's really something a lot more like electrifying than that. So
Yeah.
that's what I like about it. And John Malkovich, I mean, can we just talk about the casting of John Malkovich here?
Can
Because
we?
it is just like if you're looking at this on paper, this is just like totally out of left field.
Of course. And he's like the most, I guess, unlikely like suitor.
Hmm,
Like he's not given who like you had what Mel Gibson, Tom Cruise, that was like the 80s. And it was like he's gonna be the hot the guy, but
right.
you totally believe it. He's so charming.
Yeah.
It's
It's
attractive.
it's so bizarre. I mean, it's like there was a lot of criticism at the time, I think, for that particular casting. Some
Mhm.
people are like, you know, I would love this movie if only they hadn't cast John Malkovich, things of that nature. But for me, it's the strangest thing because, like, again, I look at it on paper, I'm like, John Malkovich for like this Lothario guy who's just like
Right.
charming women all over the place. I have a hard time believing this. But then I watch it, and by the end, I'm like, I understand why all of these people are kind of weirdly drawn to him because he has like this energy about him that is
Hmm.
so unlike what you would get out of just a regular, you know, handsome, roguish man you would think to see in this role. So it's like a weirdly like effeminate thing and also just like a confidence to him that is it's a very inspired choice
Yeah.
and I actually do think it works.
it works, and also that chemistry that he has, the the wicked energy and chemistry he has with Glenn is perfect.
Yeah, it's palpable. It's
You're just like, they are the most suited, evil but brilliant partners in crime.
Yeah, and I was gonna actually tweet something out after I watched this. I was gonna say like one of these things like name a more iconic duo. I'll wait. But then I was like, I'm looking at the things that they do in the movie, and it's like they're like really bad people. so, so it's like I don't know if this is something we want to like be romanticizing at all, but at the same time, I do find them very strangely compelling, and just
Yeah.
this weird little partnership going on. That's so cool. And I actually want to talk about the story itself and whether you think that everything, all the little threads pay off in the end, and whether you think it is maybe too convoluted or if you think it's naturally told the way it should be.
Did you ever read the book? Because I never did. I made a promise that I would.
No, I did not. I know
Just
there are
to
some changes.
just to do like a little comparison, and my little obsession that I had with the movie. But no, I really liked how it was told. I didn't find it convoluted at all. I didn't find it confusing. I can see how people would struggle to find it confusing. I mean, that ending,
Mm,
cinematically, that ending with Glenn just destroying that room was one of the best endings. Like, if we were to rank like how Glenn Close films end,
yeah, it's the best, honestly.
it's one of the best. And when she's like removing the makeup and what that
Mm,
symbolized, I just thought it's like the defeat. Like, she's lost it all now. Like, what was that whole game for?
yeah,
So I didn't have a problem with the way it was told, even though, like you said, like some people did have a problem with it.
right. And I think some people might get lost in some of like the changes that are made, especially with Madame Tourvel, Michelle Pfeiffer character, kind of rejecting John Malkovich at the start, and then eventually sort of weirdly falling for him. I think some people have some issues with that aspect, and I think there maybe could have been a few added seeds here and there to kind of explain that a little more. But at the same time, I think it all kind of is under this umbrella of the theme of the film, which is a really great quote in the movie from Valmont, which he says, "Why do you suppose we only feel compelled to chase the ones that run away?" And so, yeah, I think it really accentuates how, and I do this too in my personal life, this idea of like, having someone kind of reject you and then
Mm-hmm.
you become like more invested in wanting to get their attention, that sort of thing.
Right.
I think it's portrayed really well in the movie.
Yeah.
And yeah, going back to that ending, I think is the best part of the movie. It's one of the most haunting endings I can remember because this is a 30-year movie. I would recommend turning off the podcast now if you have not seen the ending. But again, 30 years, it's been enough time. But let's talk about this ending because it sort of ends with the two of them declaring war on each other. And Glenn Close just has this really great shot where she just says, "All right, war."
That's
And
all it takes.
yes, and it's dramatic music. Oh my god, I love it. And it ends in this sort of sword fight between the Keanu Reeves and John Malkovich, and then it sort of ends with John Malkovich letting the world know through the Keanu Reeves character, because John Malkovich is dying. He gives these letters that kind of explain the true extent of their correspondence and how much these two people have played with each other's emotions, or played with other people's emotions, I should say, and their lives. And so it's interesting because I think, in a way, this ending also really is so emblematic of like the roles of men and women and how they are portrayed and seen in society. I mean, not only then, but now, because like we see Valmont, who gets to sort of die this noble death, making peace with
Mm-hmm.
Keanu Reeves, and then basically more or less blaming everything on Glenn Close. And it gets to a point where Glenn Close is just vilified by the world, and then it's that great scene at the opera that she is like, she's always going to the opera as this social
Mm-hmm.
convention. She has all these friends and sycophants with her, and you have this ending where everyone starts booing her, and it's just like I got chills from this ending. It's just so powerful because everyone now knows the full extent of her treachery, and she's just kind of shunned from society for her deeds.
Yeah.
And so she has to just kind of disappear. And then we have this great ending, as you talked about, where she is in front of her mirror, much like literally mirroring the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
where she's very gracefully looking at the mirror, kind of obsessed with herself. And then at the end, she's just dejected, taking off her makeup, taking off her earrings, just being like totally shamed and kind of disgusted with the way things turned out, because all of this was done for like the pettiest of reasons, to just get revenge on an ex-lover, and now her whole reputation is ruined. So I mean, it's just such a classic, and the fact that it just ends on her face, that just intense, extreme close up,
Mm-hmm.
and it just fades into black from that. So powerful. What do you make of that ending?
It's so powerful, and like you said, like how it just, well, like we talked about, like at the beginning, it's a whole, when we first see her face, it's a close up. She's putting on the makeup, and it's, and she's adored as she go, when she goes to the opera and when she goes to her events, and at the end, she is she's taken the blame for it all. And that shot, I mean, I've got goosebumps just you summarizing it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't, it's just, yeah, I mean, it's so powerful, it's haunting, and you're engaged in that whole journey from that first shot to that last shot. I don't think there's a scene where you ever, once Frears pulls you in, you're in for the duration of the film. Didn't you find
Absolutely. Yeah.
that through? And it's like, why is it her that gets the bad,
Mm-hmm.
because that's how society is. It's like, well, he's absolved of his sins, even though he's probably the most conniving,
Yeah. I
you
mean,
know.
like, she did make these suggestions and she was very Machiavellian in these things, but he did not like have to do these things. He wasn't forced. So yeah, it is very emblematic of how things are, sadly. But actually, I saw that the ending is actually quite different in the book.
Okay.
Not entirely different in the fact that it still kind of ends with her in shame, but actually it goes even further, because like apparently she contracts smallpox and she is like horribly disfigured, and then she has to like disappear from society, and it's this big thing, and it's just like really hammering home this idea of her being punished for her sins, whereas I think the movie actually does a better job of kind of leaving you more satisfied and feeling a little bit bad for her, but not totally.
Yeah. Yeah. You know who we didn't mention? Susie Kurtz is in the
Yes.
film too, as
Yes.
Uma Thurman's mother. So
Yeah, I love Susie Kurtz. She's
I
great
know.
in everything. I wish she would get a bigger part in something and maybe get some awards attention, because she's been great for, as you can see now, decades. So yeah, she's great. It's a really great cast, actually. All the young people that we mentioned, Keanu Reeves, Michelle Pfeiffer, obviously, Uma Thurman, I think they all have just that great naivete to them that really works for the film
Yeah.
and kind of presents them as pawns essentially in these two Glenn Close, John Malkovich, like kings and queens. So
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. They were such babies.
I know. And it's great to see that they've all really had these great careers at this point. So
Yeah.
really stacked cast. Let's just, before we move on, talk about the Oscar-winning costumes and production design in this film because it's gorgeous.
It is. I mean, if it hadn't won, I would have been like, how could it not? The production design was done by Stuart Craig. Gorgeous, gorgeous. I didn't look into anything about outside, like where they shot it. Did you?
Right. Not entirely, but at the same time, it's really, really extravagant sets, so detailed. Like I said, I love the opera house that they're in, all the little houses, and then just the costume design. And that is by
James Aitchison did
right,
the costume
James
design,
Aitchison. Yeah.
and just the detail of those, the costumes, not just of the women but the men,
Oh
and
yeah. Really extravagant. Especially all the big Glenn Close poofy dresses. that yellow number, the blue one with the flowers. There's just so many great dresses in this movie. So yeah, just a really, if even if you're not into the story happening, it's just a gorgeous film to look at.
Yeah, and like well, John's, his it's velvet, I guess. His tailcoats and his ties and shirts and frills. It's just swooning.
I know, right? So, did you have any other things you wanted to get to before we move on to its Oscar track?
No, I mean obviously the score, George Benson score.
Yes.
I
Oh my God.
loved. We can't not talk about the score, right?
Yeah, that is so dramatic and perfect for this movie. Oh my God.
It's just, yeah, like it whisks you back to, pre-French Revolution France, and I think that's what I loved about it so much. It's like, sorry about the motorbike. Yeah, it just whisks you back to that. You felt like you were in France in that period.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the little Baroque pianos and just the sudden loudness. It's just it's all so great. So yeah, I highly recommend the film. I think it's probably not for everyone. It gets into some pretty dark territory. But if you're into costume dramas with a twist, I think this is definitely one of the best in that genre. So yeah, and also to just see a legendary Glenn Close performance because she does so much just with her face, with her body language, with her eye rolls.
She was giving shade in 1988.
She really was. This was like, I'm surprised that like this movie is not more embraced by like drag queens because like it is just like so much shade is thrown in this film. Oh my God. And I just want to end with this one little short speech that Glenn Close's character gives in the film because it is such a great monologue that encapsulates her character. And like I said, it's something that should be performed in like monologues these days because it's just so good. Here it is, okay? I practiced detachment. I learned how to look cheerful while under the table I stuck a fork into the back of my hand. I became a virtuoso of deceit. It wasn't pleasure I was after, it was knowledge. I consulted the strictest moralists to learn how to appear, philosophers to find out what to think, and novelists to see what I could get away with. And in the end, I distilled everything to one wonderfully simple principle: win or die.
Perfect.
There
Such
you
a
have it.
perfect quote.
I love it. Great movie. So
it's beyond my control.
It's beyond my control. Yes, in that classic John Malkovich delivery. Yes, so good. So when we come back, we'll be talking about why Dangerous Liaisons did not win Best Picture at the Oscars because it's lost to a little movie called Rain Man.
I've always known I was born to dominate your sex and avenge my own.
Is there anything I could do to help?
Come back when you've succeeded with Madame de Tourvel.
Yes.
And I will offer you a reward.
my love.
I have this appalling reputation.
Yes, I have been warned about you.
What is true of most men is doubly so of him.
I can't.
Love what you mean?
You promised not
yes,
to
of
speak
course,
of it.
I understand, but I must know.
I can't.
I want the excitement of watching her betray everything that's most important to her.
I love you so much. You may genuinely be unaware of this, but I can see quite plainly that you're in love with this woman.
No, not at all. Why do you suppose we only feel compelled to chase the ones who run away?
Immaturity.
And we're back. So now we are going to talk about why Dangerous Liaisons lost the Oscar to Rain Man. First of all, Dangerous Liaisons was nominated for 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Actress for Glenn Close, Best Supporting Actress for Michelle Pfeiffer, Best Adapted Screenplay for Christopher Hampton, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, and Best Original Score. And it walked away with 3 of those: Adapted Screenplay, Art Direction, and Costume Design. Very good haul for Dangerous Liaisons. So before the Oscars, the movie actually won the WGA award for the Adapted Screenplay. But meanwhile, Rain Man managed to win the Golden Globe for drama as well as the DGA. So another thing I just want to mention real quickly before we get into this Oscar race is that we have lost yet another precursor, because 1989, the next year, was the first ever Producers Guild Awards. So now we can no longer rely on PGA for a precursor. So here we are. We lost SAG, we lost Critics' Choice, now we've lost the PGA. So, Jazz, why do you think Dangerous Liaisons was not able to get over the hump and win Best Picture?
Oh God, I truly don't know. I mean, is it? I honestly have no idea as to why it wasn't able to win to get all the way, to go all the way with that.
I think it's probably the fact that Rain Man was there. And Rain Man is very much a movie I think you can sit anyone down in front of.
Yeah.
And they would be like, okay, that's a good movie. You know, and I feel like Dangerous Liaisons is a lot more challenging than Rain Man is. So, you know how that goes, you know. That is a possibility.
I think Rain Man was a huge box office.
Yeah, it was the number 1 movie.
It was the number 1 movie, so it had that behind it.
Yeah, and it's important to remember at the time that sort of thing was very important to the Oscars, the idea of really reflecting what America was watching, and the idea of a movie like this, kind of an independent-ish sort of film, doing so well at the box office is considered a big success. So it is kind of anointed in a sense in the end.
But I'm also looking, it didn't have Stephen Frears didn't have the director nomination, which at the time it was no film had won without Best Picture, right? Since
Grand Hotel, which was
Grand Hotel
1932. So it was a clear precedent there. And so that's where I get into the discussion of why we think Dangerous Liaisons was a number 2 compared to other films like Mississippi Burning or Working Girl, which did get director nominations. And I think the reason ultimately why I went with Dangerous Liaisons and why other people agree is that, first of all, it got 7 nominations, which is pretty good haul. Some good, below the line nominations, some acting nominations. And also you look at Mississippi Burning and Working Girl, and they don't get screenplay nominations. So all the films here kind of have something missing. It's a really kind of wonky year where there's all these weird anomalies happening. And so I think Dangerous Liaisons is probably a movie that they would gravitate more towards as a Best Picture winner than something like Working Girl, which people might find a little too light, or Mississippi Burning, which was actually like embroiled in controversy at the time. So that is what I would say for Dangerous Liaisons. I don't know if you have a different take as to if you think Working Girl or Mississippi Burning or even The Accidental Tourist, maybe.
Which Gina Davis beat Michelle Pfeiffer for.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, I think that is the number 2 because, like you said, Accidental Tourist, dunno. Mississippi Burning had all the controversy, and just Working Girls. Yeah, I just think that Dangerous Liaisons was. It didn't have Frears behind it, I think, to take it all the way home.
Right. And maybe it could be a situation where this is a movie that came out very late in the year. You know, it came out like at the end of December, and it was still in limited theaters at the time. There wasn't a lot of exposure to it, honestly. And that's why it missed some of like the major things like the Golden Globes, which I was looking back and I was like, why is Dangerous Liaisons not even nominated at the Golden Globes? Like, what happened here? But you know, it turned out the movie literally came in too late. So I think that might have been part of it. Maybe if it had come out earlier in the year, we would have had a director nomination. We might have had more heat for Best Picture. Who knows? You know, because I saw that it actually went wide in like February. So,
which is really late.
Right, it's very, very late.
Yeah. Well, wasn't Rain Man released on December 12th? Because it says that Rain Man was released on December 12th and Dangerous Liaisons was released on December 11th.
Oh, okay. Well, I think it might have been just like I think Rain Man was probably wider.
Yeah.
Released, and it certainly made a whole bunch of money.
It sure did.
A lot more than Dangerous Liaisons, obviously. I mean, I don't know. I think Rain Man is just a movie, like I said, that will easily just tick enough boxes that people will be like, okay, you know, it's a very likable film with likable protagonists, which is very important, I think, to a lot of Oscar voters for whatever reason. And also it has a somewhat important message of bonding over friendship, and it has this character who's autistic. It has these two very, very likable stars in the 80s, Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise at its center. And yeah, I just think it's an easier sit. Ultimately, it's just one of these movies that's just like, okay, I like that movie, you know?
Yeah, it's safe. It's safe.
It's a safe choice.
We're not going for the chess game of the sexual chess game.
Yeah. And who knows, there might have been some Academy members who were just like, I don't understand what's going on in this movie. There's too much happening. I can't keep track of all these French names. You know, there's so many bodices being ripped. I just don't know what's happening.
Who's writing which letter? Who's that letter going to?
Yes. Yeah, you need like a flow chart to keep up with it. Yeah. I don't know. Like I said, I just think Rain Man was a much, much easier sit for Academy members. And that's pretty much the full argument at the end of the day. It's just one of these years where I don't think it was too competitive ultimately, unfortunately, because Rain Man is also the only movie in the Best Picture race to get a director and screenplay nomination. So it's kind of one of these things where it's like, well, obviously it's going to be this one.
Yeah. So Rain Man wins.
Rain Man wins. And it's still regarded as a pretty popular Best Picture winner ultimately. Maybe not by like big cinephiles, you know, but a general audience, I think, really takes to this kind of mainstream, very simple story about friendship and brotherhood, you know? So,
yeah.
And so let's get to some of the other movies that were nominated for Best Picture. What are your thoughts on Working Girl?
I loved that. I actually had a Working Girl poster up in my room. I did like that. She's, you know, Sigourney Weaver as the boss, boss, you know. I thought it was great. I loved that film. And Melanie Griffith, of course, and Harrison Ford not playing Indiana Jones. That was...
Yeah, I love Harrison Ford in this movie. I wish he would do more comedies, you know?
Yeah, well, he did Regarding Henry after with Annette Bening, which another film I loved. And then, yeah, like Stop doing action. You can do
Yeah,
great with comedy drama.
I'd love to just see him do a comedy like now in his career, just to see what that looks like, because he's still got it, you know.
He could play the romantic lead. Like, there's no reason why he couldn't do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Put it out there. We want a Harrison Ford comedy,
Yeah.
romantic comedy, anything.
Absolutely. I love Joan Cusack as well, and her big hair and her crazy makeup. She's just actually kind of a classic supporting actress turn.
Yes.
Just very much someone who kind of steals the show whenever she's on screen. And she's another one of these people who's so underrated, and I hope that she can go all the way and have a really great role one day and just take it home, you know.
One day. And Carly Simon's Let the River Run was like, what a tune.
Yes. Yeah, that is, dare I say, that is a bop. Like, it is, it rules.
That was a good film looking back now. There you go.
Yeah, Sigourney Weaver actually was kind of a front runner going into that Oscar race because she had won the Golden Globe for Working Girl. And she did not manage to do that because Gina Davis wins for The Accidental Tourist. And Gina Davis, that's actually a win that kind of came out of nowhere because she really did not get any major or minor precursors. Like, that was very much one of these kind of Marissa Tomei kind of wins that just sort of come out of nowhere and are like, oh, okay, it's an inspired choice. Did you ever see The Accidental Tourist?
I did, and yeah, it was a really weird film. But yeah, I mean, nobody saw that. Nobody saw that coming. It's like she's such a wacky character in that film, but she'd also done more Earth Girls Are Easy, which again is a wacky, a wacky character. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I haven't revisited it since probably at least 10, 15 years. Does anybody revisit The Accidental Tourist?
What a great question. Well, I actually visited it for the first time this week because I had never seen it. It's just one of these ones that I had to fill in the gaps here, and I just never got around to it. But it's pretty decent. I don't really know why it's a Best Picture nominee, to be honest. It's kind of one of these movies that's about white male angst and just kind of searching for meaning, and William Hurt is kind of dull, honestly, as a protagonist. And Gina Davis is
his son dies, basically, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's kind of what gets him into this malaise, and ultimately Gina Davis is kind of sort of a manic pixie dream girl who jumps him out of his sort of malaise, and he falls in love with her, and there's this triangle with her and Kathleen Turner, and it's fine, it's very much this sort of thing. It's Lawrence Kasdan. It's a little bit in the same vein as The Big Chill, where it's kind of about that yuppie angst, and so your mileage may vary on your patience for that. But it's fine. It's not great. And I think there are other movies that came out this year that probably deserved more attention than that, but it happened. And Gina Davis has an Oscar, so I'm not going to be too upset about it, ultimately.
I'm happy.
Yeah. And then the other one is Mississippi Burning. And that is an issues drama where that was also embroiled in controversy, as I said, because it's about civil rights in the South. I think it's Mississippi. Obviously it's Mississippi because it's Mississippi Burning. That was a really dumb thing that I just said. But so it's in Mississippi. It's about civil rights, and it's about these people who are going out canvassing for votes who get killed, and these two white officers, Gene Hackman and Willem Dafoe, have to go in and solve whatever's happening. There's a lot to do with the KKK and things like that. But really, a lot of the movie, people have said, is very much a white savior narrative in a sense. There's a lot of erasure of kind of all of the black activists that were involved in the true story that it's based on. And so there was a lot of angry people out there who felt like this was not representing the truth of what actually happened. So that made it pretty much impossible for it to win Best Picture ultimately, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. Living in the UK, I actually didn't see. And we also didn't have the internet, so I didn't see a lot of that argument. But obviously,
Right.
going back and reading through what people thought, it just wasn't. It wasn't going to win Best Picture,
Right.
and that's why Rain Man seemed the safest.
Right, because once again, it's like very
Yeah.
uncontroversial in many ways. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot written about it, even in things like the Los Angeles Times,
Yeah.
just about how they left out all the black activism. And someone Phil, it says, I was reading Inside Oscar before this to get a sense of what they were talking about at the time.
Yeah.
And it says Essence's film historian Donald Bogle, who said, at heart, Mississippi Burning is a white man's burden movie that trashes its black subjects while it celebrates the courage of its white heroes. So that is a very blunt way of putting things. I do think that it is kind of accurate. I do think it's kind of a dated film ultimately.
Yeah.
And I mean, Frances McDormand is actually good in the film. She has a small part as the wife of this mayor, I think, who kind of gets involved with Gene Hackman and kind of helps him out, and she gets a beating for it, and it's really a brutal role for her, but she gets her first Oscar nomination here, and it's a great performance in what I think is a flawed movie, and Gene Hackman is good as well. So it's a Best Picture lineup that's not entirely my favorite, but it still has enough highs in it, I think, that makes it at least worth your watch.
Yeah. When did you revisit it, or did you?
Yeah, that's another one I had to visit for the first time. So, yeah, watching it 30 years in the future probably doesn't do it any favors, to be honest, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I think they showed. When did I see it? I think I saw. They actually showed it at school.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So there you go.
So before we go on to our next segment, I just wanted to get to a few questions from Twitter because I asked people to send in their questions here. First off, I wanted to talk about Dangerous Liaisons, since that's the big subject here, because Cameron McRae asked, why did Stephen Frears miss out on a Best Director nomination, and was it Scorsese who took his spot? Why did Stephen Frears get snubbed? I'm not actually too sure, because I do think it was a top contender, and I do consider that a pretty major snub. I would say it might come down to the fact that, again, it might have been released late, or just the director's branch maybe didn't like the way that the film was directed as far as some of the American actors, that sort of sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think maybe they just didn't like the conniving, the wickedness. I truly don't know. Like, did it come out too late? Was it the story? Yeah.
Yeah, it might have just been a combination of everything there. And when you look at the other directing nominees, we have Barry Levinson for Rain Man, Mike Nichols for Working Girl, Alan Parker for Mississippi Burning, all Best Picture nominees. But then we have Martin Scorsese for The Last Temptation of Christ. And also we have Charles Crichton for A Fish Called Wanda. And I think probably Scorsese makes sense that the director's branch is just going to appreciate whatever he has to offer. And I think there were people, even though it was a controversial movie, as I'm sure you know, I think maybe there were people who applauded his sort of his choices in that film.
Yeah.
But as far as A Fish Called Wanda, I mean, I'm going to get to that later when we talk about should have been a contender films, but one of my favorites. I think it's very well directed. I'm actually a little surprised it's in here, other than the fact that this was, I read that it was his last film, so that probably helped with his narrative. But yeah, that's probably one of the movies that ultimately is obviously the one that knocked out Dangerous Liaisons. So I don't know. Like I said, a really weird year.
We don't know. We'll never know.
Yeah. Unless they release the tallies.
Wouldn't that be great?
Oh my God, I would love that. I would eat that up. And then I would finally know if I was right about some of these runner-ups. But going to Working Girl, Andrew Carden asked, inexplicably, Working Girl missed the original screenplay nomination. Which of the Oscar nominees would you boot for it? Very good question, Andrew Carden, because the nominees were Big, Bull Durham, A Fish Called Wanda, Rain Man, and Running on Empty.
Oh my
Would
God.
you boot any of these movies for Working Girl?
I don't even know if I've seen Running on Empty. Who's in that? That's the one I'd boot then.
Well, there you go. It's with River Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, so I'm terrible. You can revoke every card from me right now. So that's the one that I would. That's the one I would boot. What about you?
I would probably actually agree with that because I actually like all of these movies.
Right.
I think I don't know. Maybe I'd boot Bull Durham possibly, but I really love Big and A Fish Called Wanda, and I decently like Rain Man. So I would put in Working Girl for sure. I think that is a huge snub, and I again do not understand it. But probably Running on Empty or Bull Durham.
Yeah. I loved Big. I love Big.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we'll get to that. And so, going back to Rain Man, Matt Neglia asked, how/why did Tom Cruise not get a nomination if they loved Rain Man so much? Do you think he should have been nominated? If so, who would you replace to squeeze him in?
Okay, who else was nominated?
So the nominees for Best Actor were Gene Hackman for Mississippi Burning, Tom Hanks for Big, Dustin Hoffman for Rain Man, who was the winner, Edward James Olmos for Stand and Deliver, and Max von Sydow for Pele the Conqueror.
Oh my gosh.
That's another tough one.
That's a tough one because they were all like really good films and really good roles.
Yeah. I have to be honest, I don't think I would have nominated Tom Cruise.
I was just gonna go there. I was like, that 5 to boot one of those to nominate Tom Cruise, I feel no.
Yeah, I mean it's one of these roles where he's just kind of playing a arrogant, cool jerk sort of thing that he did a lot in his youth, and I don't know if it's like a huge stretch, so as far as like what he was doing at the time. So yeah, I'm actually pretty comfortable with it. I don't know exactly why. Maybe it's just because they felt like it wasn't too much of a stretch ultimately.
Yeah.
What do you think?
But I feel like I was watching Tom Cruise. And I mean that look, Dustin's performance was far more superior, I feel, personally.
Right, and it really does kind of overshadow him to begin with. So
Exactly. Yeah, I mean Tom was good. I liked him a lot in that. Was it Oscar worthy? I don't. I mean, he'd be 6 if we were to go to 6 in that category.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, Tom.
It's Hoffman's film.
It is. It's Dustin Hoffman's film all the way through. And there was a little bit of a discussion that popped off of this question on Twitter where people were talking about, hey, maybe like Tom Cruise was the lead and Dustin Hoffman was supporting. And maybe it was category fraud for to have Dustin Hoffman in lead. But I actually think it is a co-lead film.
Yeah.
But
I didn't connect to what's his character? Charlie?
Yeah, Charlie Babbitt.
I didn't connect to Charlie as much as Hoffman.
Right.
Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, I'm sure he's fine. His life is fine. And then just going back to the actress race, like I said, Glenn Close, I think she really came for lack of a better term, close to winning here. But Jodie Foster ends up winning for The Accused. This is her first of 2 wins.
Yeah.
And Love Kyle, aka Kyle Bailey, asked on Twitter, would you take away Jodie Foster's win here because she will win for a superior performance and give Glenn her Oscar? What do you think? I'm curious to know what you might say.
Jodie's performance was so powerful. Like, Glenn was so close to that. But I've revisited The Accused not that long ago, and it's one hell of a performance. I mean, she was against Chloe's Melanie Griffith for Working Girl, Meryl Streep for Cry in the Dark, and Sigourney, but by God, that was a performance.
Yeah. And it's also a character that I think is very sympathetic and sadly very relevant even now.
Right.
So, yeah. I think, it's a classic kind of thing where I think, again, they both give really, really great performances, all-time performances in their career. But when you look at the 2 roles, I think Glenn Close in Dangerous Liaisons is a very strong performance, but it's also such an unlikable character to a lot of people that it's just harder,
I think she was probably the most unlikable in that field next to Meryl's Lindy Chamberlain, because it was that woman had no emotion on that stand.
Right. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I would say that I guess I would take away Jodie's Oscar here just so I could give Glenn Close an Oscar for her phenomenal work in the 80s. And then just since Jodie Foster is going to win for The Silence of the Lambs, I'm not too upset about it, so.
This is true.
It's always good to spread things around, I think.
Spread the love.
Exactly. Yeah, so I think those are pretty much the questions as far as the Best Picture nominees. So now I want to get into everyone's favorite segment, which is our Should Have Been a Contender segment. And this is other movies nominated for Oscars or just any movie released in 1988 that probably didn't even come close to Oscar. So, Jazz, do you have a few you want to mention here?
Okay, I love beaches. I feel laugh at me all you want.
Okay, no.
I feel it's a beautiful story about friendship, but I mean, yes, we had that with Rain Man too. So that's one. And A Cry in the Dark. I know a lot of people are very I don't know how people felt about that here, but or a lot of people felt that that character is so the parents were so unsympathetic to that, and those performances were just like that. But I thought, Meryl was great at playing the devastated mother at that point in her career between, Kramer versus Kramer, Sophie's Choice, and then that film next. And Samuel was brilliant as well. I mean, again, we weren't really sympathetic towards his character, but I thought, I think those are the 2, maybe, that I would have.
Well, for me, this year really comes down to 2 of the films that I mentioned in the Best Original Screenplay race, and those are Big and A Fish Called Wanda. I love both of these movies to death. Big is just such a blast, especially if you're a kid just watching this, just seeing this kid fulfilling the fantasies of being an adult and sort of just playing with toys. And Tom Hanks is just, for me, is one of his absolute best performances in a very strong career. And it's one of these things where I just wish he would go back to more comedies like this because he is so good in this.
He's so good. And again, that was on TV not that long ago where I've seen it. And it's just, whether you're a kid or a big kid, it's so much fun. It doesn't get boring. It doesn't get old.
I know. I just get drawn into it. It's we got a female director here with Penny Marshall, and
Yes.
one of the highest grossing films for a woman, especially to have it be in 1988, very significant. And she directs the hell out of it. I think it's very well directed, super great as far as pacing and production design, even, and just the way that she is able to get Tom Hanks to be this hybrid of a kid and an adult, I think is just masterful. So I wish she would direct more, honestly. She's great.
I would love to see her direct a film like that again, and I would like to see Tom Hanks do films like at least one or two more films, like big.
Absolutely.
Something in that, area.
Mm-hmm. And I actually really like Elizabeth Perkins in the film too. I think she has a really fascinating, like, very difficult role to play in that. But it's very good. I mean, lately she's been just doing a lot of acerbic, like, awful housewife types of roles and things like Sharp Objects and things like that.
Right.
But at the time, she was just this really likable presence, and yeah, I really like her. I think in a weaker year, she might have even made my lineup. The movie itself would have definitely made my lineup. So yeah, a great one to just visit and revisit. And then obviously the iconic scene where they're stepping on the piano is just so great.
Yeah, because who hasn't? I went to FAO Schwartz and I tried doing that.
Really? I have not done that. But and then the other one is A Fish Called Wanda, which is like so much fun for me.
That's a fun film.
It's so fun. And a great cast, once again.
Yeah. Great cast.
Jamie Lee Curtis being really just all over the place, and John Cleese in a very different kind of role. And then we have Kevin Kline being even more different than what we've come to expect from Kevin Kline, just being this over-the-top American guy who hates the British and just gets irate when anyone calls him stupid. It's one of these roles that I'm really happy that the Oscars actually took notice of, because it is a super broad comedic performance, and we don't get those very often winning Oscars.
Yeah, exactly, and he deservedly got the Oscar.
Absolutely. Yeah. And without any big precursors either. So that was another big win there. It's basically like the Oscars just didn't care about whatever any other organization was doing. They're just like, we're going to do our own thing. So, and I'm not complaining, especially about that win. And I'm glad it got into director as well. That's another super inspired thing, because we don't see a lot of just straight up comedy films getting into director. So that's pretty cool. Another big one from this year is Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and that made a big splash at the Oscars too. It got 6 nominations, 3 wins, including film editing, which is crazy. Visual effects, sound. So yeah, it's another movie I loved, especially when I was a kid. This really great blending of animation and real life, just super slick. It's directed by Rob Zemeckis, and yeah, I really love it.
Bob Hoskins was super.
Bob Hoskins, yes, so good.
Was that the year of Beetlejuice as well?
Yes, it was.
There you go. See, that was a great year for. That was another Gina Davis movie.
Yes, it was. Gina Davis having a year. Yeah. And Sebastian Gronbach asked, in an expanded year, do you think Who Framed Roger Rabbit could have made it into Best Picture, or is it just out of reach? I think maybe. I'm not positive, because it doesn't get into any like of the above the lines. But I think
it's cinematography, right?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And editing, which it won for. So.
Yeah. And it won a Special Achievement Award for animation direction. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, I would say it's not something that's generally in their wheelhouse, But at the same time, I think it's one of these special cases where it made such a splash just cinematically that it's entirely possible.
Never know. You never know. You just don't know what they were thinking.
No, you certainly do not. We also have Die Hard, obviously an iconic film from this year. And Midnight Run, also really great. So there's some good films here. There's some not so great films that haven't really held up that well, but overall, another just wacky year at the Oscars.
Heathers was not nominated, but that's just become a classic. And
yeah, Heathers is very good. I believe it came out like it was in festivals in '88, and then it was released in the US in '89. But yeah, Heathers is another one of these great high school movies that absolutely holds up today and is super dark. So, did you have any other films that you wanted to get to from this year?
no, I think we've covered most of. I think we've covered most of them.
Yeah, most of the big ones.
Yeah, most of the big ones. Yeah.
Yeah, there's always going to be someone complaining about how we didn't cover something, but regardless, the one thing I wanted to talk about before we move on to our final segment is that this was a very notorious year at the Oscar ceremony itself, because this was the year that they had the weird musical number at the beginning with Rob Lowe and Snow White.
My goodness, I remember seeing that on TV at 2:00 in the morning in the UK.
And did you think you were having like a fever dream?
I was like having a Darren Aronofsky mother moment. What?
Yeah. I still can't really explain what they were thinking with this, because they just have like this Snow White who is, I believe, unauthorized by Disney. Because they end up like almost suing, I think, afterwards. It's a whole thing. Really juicy stuff. Really juicy story there. But they have her and Rob Lowe singing like Proud Mary, but like a rendition that's about like going to Hollywood. It's just so bizarre. And everyone in the audience is like, I don't know what's happening.
What am I watching? Okay.
Yes. And this is Alan Carr was the one who produced the Oscars this year, and he was just like quickly removed after this kind of in humiliation. And so the other sort of big thing from the ceremony was they had a segment, I don't know if you've heard about this, or you probably saw it actually, was the Stars of Tomorrow.
I don't remember. That could have been when I passed out.
Yes. You're just too overwhelmed by the opening. But yeah, they had this segment where Bob Hope and Lucille Ball were introducing the Stars of Tomorrow, which was like 15 very young celebrities and stars who people were calling like these up and comers. And there was people like Blair Underwood and Ricky Lake and Corey Feldman and just all these youthful stars in the late 80s. And they were like, you know, these guys are going to be up on that Oscar stage by the turn of the millennium. And the most ironic part of all of this is that literally none of them have even been nominated.
I was going to ask you how many of them actually got nominated.
Yeah. Like the biggest star, like the biggest person who could even be within a whiff of being nominated at this point is like Christian Slater. So not great. We got Patrick Dempsey, even Melora Hardin, just all these random people. Some of them are still working, but like are not anywhere near the Oscar sphere at all. And it's on YouTube. It's on the Oscars official YouTube page, and you can watch it. It's a big 15-minute segment. So
I think I want to revisit the Snow White segment just for, just for the crap.
It's all just a lot. It's all very 80s. So there you have it. That's 88. So any other thoughts here before we get into our last segment?
No, just what a year.
What a year.
But that was the year, I think, didn't Cher go to the Oscars that year and she just wore something really normal?
Yeah, and that was the most shocking of all. Yes. Okay, so when we come back, we will be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Rain Man or Dangerous Liaisons deserved that Best Picture win.
The nominees for Best Picture are The Accidental Tourist, Lawrence Kasdan, Charles Oken, and Michael Grillo, producers. Dangerous Liaison, Norma Heyman and Hank Moonjean, producers. Mississippi Burning, Frederick Zolo and Robert F. Colesberry, producers. Rain Man, Mark Johnson, producer. And Working Girl, Douglas Wick, producer. And the winner is Rain Man, Mark Johnson, producer.
And we're back. So now we're going to be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Rain Man deserved that Best Picture win or if Dangerous Liaisons maybe deserved it a little more. So, Jazz, what is your verdict?
Oh my gosh, am I going to be hated for saying it? No, I'm okay. I haven't decided, but I'm just going to say I'm going to keep Rain Man with the Best Picture win.
Okay.
As much as I love Dangerous Liaisons.
Is there a reason?
Maybe because I'm playing it safe. Like, maybe I've turned safe.
Yeah. I mean, it's a safe win. It's not too controversial. So, but I have to say, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that I think Dangerous Liaison should have won. There, I said it.
There you go. You said it. I didn't have the balls to say it.
You didn't want people to go into your Twitter mentions.
No, but I mean, okay, Dustin Hoffman's performance, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's
phenomenal.
Yeah, it's undeniable.
Yeah,
and I actually like it more than his original Oscar win for Kramer versus Kramer. So yeah, it's a great film. I think they're both very good movies. For me personally, my own taste, I just got to go with Dangerous Liaisons because it's one of my faves. So
definitely fun.
Yeah,
and everybody should revisit it.
Absolutely. So thank you, Jazz, for coming on with me.
Thank you for inviting me, and I had so much fun, and we did it.
We did it. We finally did it.
Paid off.
It's like 6 months in the making. Yeah.
Truly it was.
Yes. So tell the people where they can find you on the internet if they want to read more of your thoughts.
You can find me on Twitter at JazzT, or you can find me on Instagram at JazzT21.
Mm-hmm. And you are a writer for AwardsDaily, so you can follow some of her writing there.
Yes.
And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. And you can find the podcast at Oscar Runner Up. The show is on Apple Podcasts / iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, where you can rate, review, and subscribe. And now I'll leave it up to you listening at home as to whether you think Rain Man deserved Best Picture or if Dangerous Liaisons should have taken it. And you can do that at filmtrophies.com, my website, or my email at filmtrophies@gmail.com. So once again, thank you, Jazz.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And I will bid you all adieu.